Suzanne Craig and Danny Savalas are back with me to talk more about all of this and then some. I want to kind of pick up a little bit on where I left off in the last segment, which is how we judge, Suzanne, the merit and the strength of this case early on. Did we do a disservice to the Manhattan DA by saying this was the four of the weakest at times case, when in fact they secured a conviction? A lot of people were looking at the D.C. election interference case and saying, that's the case. That's the strongest. Or the Mar-a-Lago docs case. That's the strongest case.
I never thought about it in terms of, I've heard that debate, strongest, weakest. I sort of looked at it in terms of just severe and kind of consequential. And I also still think the election interference part of it, I know people were calling it a hush money payment and a payment to a porn star, so it was minimized. It had to do with election interference.
Right.
And it seems cinematic to me. But when you look at the fact that there's also the January 6 cases, I mean, there were, riots and a threat to the democracy right at the heart of it. Mm-hmm. And the classified document case is so serious. I think that we can't, I just sort of frame it more, I guess, journalistically. I don't look at it in terms of, did we do a disservice or a service to it? There was debate about it. And there certainly was novel things in this case that caused people to have that discussion. But it was the first to go forward, and they have a conviction. And I know a lot of people didn't think it would get to that point, and maybe it shouldn't have been brought. I just tend to believe you should bring the cases that are just and you feel are right, no matter who they're against.
Danny, I want to talk sentencing here because I want to have clarity first on this gag order. My understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Suzanne, if you know this information, and or Danny, if you know this information, but I was taking a look at the gag order from the court, and my understanding is this gag order actually is still in place. And if that is in fact the case, he did, to a certain extent, violate the gag order even yesterday during his 45-minute or so presser. You couple that with his 10 violations throughout the trial and the $10,000 he's had to pay, and then you think about the sentencing. Is there a possibility of the former president seeing jail time here, Danny?
There's a possibility. I don't believe he'll see jail time. Let me tick through very quickly my for and against. And the fors for incarceration are less than the against incarceration. In favor of incarceration, you have the obvious lack of acceptance of responsibility. Donald Trump will not accept responsibility. That's a major factor, not a major factor, but a significant factor in sentencing. Related to that is his defiance of the gag order and basically his constantly annoying the judge. Those are 2 points that I think weigh in favor of a possible incarceration sentence. Here are all the points against it. Number 1, no violence. Number 2, no drugs. Number 3, no guns. Number 4, first-time offender. Number 5, over 70 years old. The rates of recidivism plummet after age 70. And then a controversial reason. The others, I think, are indisputable. The controversial reason I say is that there is no traditional loss and no traditional victims. Now, I've gotten a lot of heat for saying this, but what I'm talking about is the way we traditionally weigh victims and loss. There was not fraud in the sense that a victim...
Didn't mean to interrupt you, Danny, but sometimes I like to.
Yep.
Isn't Stormy Daniels, wouldn't she be considered a victim here? Yes, not the victim in the normal sense of the words, i.e. she's not a murder victim per se or an assault victim, but nonetheless a victim of this, right?
No, Stormy Daniels is the opposite of a victim. She made $130,000. I'd be hard pressed to find a victim in American criminal history who was considered a victim who profited to the tune of $130,000. Normally, victims are measured. Normally, they can be the state, they can be the government if you defraud them out of welfare benefits, for example, and that's happened in New York. Or they can be victims like, let's say I made up a fictional university and charged people tuition, like someone we know. That might be a victim if there were a criminal case, someone who handed over that money and was defrauded. This is not the traditional view of victims and loss, because people will say to me, well, he may have subverted the 2016 election, and look at all the bad things that happened as a result of that. I agree. That's probably true. It's just not what we traditionally think of, at least in sentencing, as victims and loss. Anyone can make an argument, and I'm listening, anyone can make an argument that there are some consequences that were bad and people that were hurt as a result of Donald Trump's crime. It's just not what we in the criminal justice system traditionally think of as victims and financial loss.
See, but the key word, Suzanne, that Danny's been using here is tradition, and this whole thing is kind of skirted
That's right,
tradition. And you said it, isn't the victims the voters?
I mean, something of great value, potentially so much value that Donald Trump thought it was enough value that he went to such great lengths to hide it from the American voters.
Yeah.
And this is new territory, but they potentially are victims. Would people have changed their votes if they had known this information? And Donald Trump certainly thought so because he went to great lengths to keep it from them.
Danny, though, the probation office is the one that has to do kind of the pre-sentencing investigation, right? The pre-sentencing interviews with Donald
PSR.
Trump's family members and that kind of thing. Is it likely even that, for instance, Don Jr. and or Ivanka or Eric Trump or Donald Trump himself are actually going to sit down with anybody from the probation's office to give these interviews to prepare for this sentencing?
No, and they don't necessarily have to. The probation officer prepares a PSR through interviews, and sometimes people don't want to talk. You can imagine a situation where a criminal, his spouse is like, I'm not going to talk to those people. They ruined our lives. That happens. So it's not uncommon for that to happen. And by the way, do they really need to interview Donald Trump to get his biographical information? Can't they just Google it? I mean, everything is known about Donald Trump. Normally, they're trying to find out things to tell the judge the context about this person's life. But look, the PSR is very important. The facts that go in there go to the judge, and the judge weighs it heavily, more so than the sentencing memoranda from each side. So the big question for me, I know the defense is going to be asking for probation only. I'm really looking to see what the DA's office does. Do they say, hey, we declare victory, we don't really need an incarceration sentence, or do they go for jail time? That, to me, is a really interesting question.
I want to pivot just for a moment on this final question, Suzanne. I want to talk about politics here for a moment, right? And who is really going to benefit from all of this, right? Robert Kennedy has kind of been in the wings, waiting.
His name comes up as somebody potentially that could benefit. You think if this does draw away people who were leaning towards Trump or were in Trump's camp, I think he's always going to have that core. I think Bobby Kennedy does stand to benefit. And it's a good reminder. I just pulled up the list. He is already on the ballot in California, Delaware, Hawaii, Michigan, Oklahoma, Texas, and Utah. And he said he's secured his place in numerous other states, including Iowa, Nebraska, Idaho. He's looking to get on the ballot in every state. We don't talk about it a lot, but he is really moving forward, and he's got money and machinery on the ground. He's collecting either signatures to get on the ballot, or he's getting on through the other parties. He's taking their spot. But I see him as a winner in terms of what happened this week. And if there are people who are looking for an alternative, and he's out there, criticizing the verdict, he's definitely playing into that, and he's hoping to cut off some votes on this.
And who benefits from the loss of a Bobby Kennedy vote?
Joe Biden. Yeah.
Suzanne Craig, thank you. Danny Ceballos, thank you as well.